Hello and welcome to GuyLogic. My name is Temko and this is a review of the Hive, a hybrid RTS RPG game with a large focus on story. It is developed by Skydome Entertainment, and as far as I can tell, this is their first title and it's been on early access for about 2 years now, and it's coming out in its full release right about now. So before we dive into the nature of this RTS/RPG hybrid, I'd like to talk a little bit about options, PC performance, and everything like that, because there's a couple of things here you might want to know. So as always, if you're not interested in this sort of thing, you can press on ahead with the annotation on screen and skip right on ahead to the gameplay section. For the rest of us, let's go ahead and dive into some options, where we have a full screen and windowed mode available to us, as well as some resolution options. Not all of them by far, but the vast majority of regular resolutions are available here. You've got VSync, and this is the one I want to talk about a little bit, because you see I have VSync turned on. This is something I just generally do to keep the recording rate smooth, because it helps me with my editing. But in this case, if I turn it off, it moves the FPS to 30 instead of 60, which is ridiculous and weird. I'm not sure why that is, and the game doesn't hold 60 FPS almost never in game. It usually hovers about 50 to 60, but never a stable 60. And turning VSync off makes it go 30 and locked to 30, which is really weird. This is clearly an issue or a bug with the game, but I have not been able to find a way to solve it. So keep that in mind if you're getting the game. The VSync is a little bit weird and wonky and bugged. AA doesn't say what kind of AA, but I think it's FXAA. Bloom, we disable that, and we have some other options here like tilt shifts, SSAO, and shadows. Sound-wise, we do have full controls for all the various volumes, including advisor volume, which is basically dialogue volume, and music unit, master volume, and subtitles on or off, which is also really good. And controls are fully rebindable as you deem fit, so that is really good. You notice there's a very limited number of key bindings available to you. And if you think RTS, then this is a woefully short list of available key combinations. If you're a little bit familiar with StarCraft, they have a ridiculous metric ton of various key bindings you can do, and it's also necessary because the variety of players that play in their own preferred playstyle and the variety of combos, units, and abilities, and everything like that you can bind to the various combos. In this case, these are all pretty down, and getting unit abilities to trigger is really weird because there's always the F and V buttons, which is a little bit weird for most skills. So there are some issues with that as well, but I'll get into those more when we load up the game. So let's start with one of my main bugbears with this game, which is the AI. Now RTSs, especially in single player campaigns, and especially if they're story focused like this one is, live and die on the strength of their AI. Whether it's their movement AI, whether it's the pathing algorithms for the enemies, whether it's targeting from your own units, whether it's prioritization in resource nodes, all RTS games rely heavily on AI subroutines for every possible task. Because even when players are playing at the optimal level, a lot of these questions are put to the core, to the game, and said, okay, you handle this, you handle that, you handle unit prioritization, you handle combat mechanics, you handle targeting and aiming. All of these things are handled by various unit AIs. And some of them are really smart, some of them are really stupid, some of them are deliberately limited in certain situations. If you pull the comparison back to something like StarCraft, the Widowmine unit is particularly limited in the AI because it targets the first unit that joins its cluster within a certain range and will fire on that unit regardless of what. So there is a very limited use for that unit if you do not have control. And the problem with the Hive is that most units have no AI to speak of that I have found. They'll either move into melee and attack, stay into range and attack, and if an enemy runs up to them into melee range, even if they're a ranged unit, they'll stay in melee range, they won't move away. Even telling them the direct command to move away will often fail them moving away. Units that are specifically designed to tank have no issue at all being on the sidelines, not doing any form of taking damage. A variety of units whose job it is to heal will not prioritize a variety of units whose low health is low or who may need something else. Things like autocasting abilities is not available. Everything is just very limited. And the same counts for the various workers. If you set a worker on gathering minerals, for example, out of a mineral node, or gathering food out of various food nodes such as fish or dead animals, they will gather that node until it dries up, and then they will stop doing anything. They will not move on to the next node. They will not alert you in any way that you have idle workers. That isn't mentioned anywhere. The same goes for your combat groups or your positioning. Same goes for unit selection. Even things like unit health are very bad to measure, and everything just sort of scales up from there. Your two resources are food and minerals, but your unit cap is both a hard and a soft cap. That soft cap is never explained, you just run into it eventually. And even that isn't a real soft cap on unit building, because if you have a queen, which is a large round thing in my army, then the queen can circumvent that in certain situations by spawning units directly, which is really weird in of itself. So there is a ton of weird stuff here, including not being able to focus select units, not being able to cycle through units by type. Like, all the things you expect from a proper RTS just aren't in. The game is only in RTS by the grace of it having a mineral gathering mechanic and a unit creation mechanic, and that is a damn shame. Now, talking about that, the same goes for the enemy opponent and the enemy AI. In no single campaign map has the AI ever expanded its bases. Never have they spent time gathering up army and attacking me from a different angle. There is no tactics, there is no depth to the AI at all. An enemy AI sent to gather something will just always move in that direction, ignore your army completely. They won't run away at all. They won't even try to circumvent something. If you destroy a building of an enemy, they will not rebuild that building somewhere else. No, they'll send a worker to that exact location to rebuild that exact building in the exact spot you crushed it, which is really weird. The same goes for targeting and target accolation. So if your units start attacking, let's say, a building without forced focused attack, so you don't specifically target that building, you just tell them attack move to get that location, and they start attacking a certain building or a certain unit, they will not switch away from that target unless you specifically tell them to target something else, which is really weird if a higher priority target comes to range or higher. Again, really weird. So from an AI and RTS standpoint, the game has some serious issues. But the game is also very story driven. So how does that work? Well, the game has a series of maps like any traditional RTS, and on those maps you have certain objectives. Sometimes these objectives involve you going around and killing enemies. Sometimes they involve you picking items up in one spot and bringing them to a different spot to open up a puzzle. Sometimes you have to defend a point. Most of the time it's really basic RTS mechanic stuff, but then with a nice narration and a nice progressive story. Which I'll grant the developers, from a story perspective, this game is quite fun if you ignore the opening sequence, which apparently doesn't have anything to do with the actual story. I don't get it either, but such is the situation. What they have also done, which is somewhat interesting, is introduce enemy AI that is neutral to you. So you can think about giant lizards on a map, or wraiths or undead or something like that guard a variety of chests with loot items in them. Now I'll get into items in a second, but adding this variety of different enemies that you can kill to sort of have side objectives while you're roaming the map and exploring is pretty interesting. So I do applaud the developer for that aspect, sort of to enrich the map world. And speaking about the map world and enriching it, I do have to say that the art direction for the game is quite nice. The underwater creature and shell beasts and everything like that, from crabs and oysters and stuff like that, is really apparent in the way the various enemies and various units are made, and that is really well put together. I really do enjoy the aesthetic. The underground, underwater, under ocean current and feel of little pools with fish in them, little embedded tombs in between them, lava pits, all of this sort of really fits together thematically, and that is a very well done job on the developer side. Obviously, it's a major shame that the game has so many gameplay issues in regards to its RTS mechanic. One thing the game has a pretty interesting adaptation on is items. Now, we have seen this very similar item system in games like Warcraft, where you can pick up items for your heroes and equip them with like weapons or armor or other special items, and sometimes these are quest objectives and sometimes not. Where the Hive takes it a little step further is adding the ability for you to use these various items and equip any set of units in your army. Every unit can have up to 6 items. Obviously, you want to prioritize certain items for the units. Your tank is going to get an item that increases their health, and another one would get an item that increases their defense, and maybe you want to get one that increases dodge chance, or has life drain or vampirism. And you want to hand these out to a variety of units you have available in your army. And these items also serve a different purpose. A third pseudo resource is DNA strands. Now, you use DNA strands to unlock upgrades in various units. And the interesting part that the game has done is contain these items that can be used to generate DNA strands as something that goes with you from level to level. So when you complete Act 1 or Act 2 or Act 3, you'll slowly start to gather up a variety of items, and you can hand those in for DNA. when you unlock units, you'll keep them for the next round, the next map, the next level. I do like that from a story-driven perspective. That is a really nice feature. This way, you're always weighing the risks and benefits of keeping an item as opposed to selling it off for DNA strands. And then you're weighing off getting the upgrade as a general upgrade to all your units as opposed to having a single item for one set of units. So I do like that part of the game. It's actually the most strategic part of the game that I've encountered. So kudos to the developer for a very interesting itemization system. And obviously these items sometimes drop from enemies, sometimes they drop from NPC bosses, sometimes they're quest given, etc, etc. I do like that part. It's quite well put together. What I am not a fan of is the entire RTS mechanic system, because as I said earlier, you're missing most core features that would make an RTS. And I already talked about targeting and AI and stuff like that, but also things like hotkeys, which I mentioned earlier in the review, just aren't that available. I can make control groups out of my units in any way I'd like, but there's no way to display them. It doesn't tell me when I'm missing workers, or if I have workers that are being attacked. It doesn't ever tell me the objectives on my map. It doesn't showcase any resource nodes I have already discovered. All of these things are just not available visually or communicated to the player in any way. You have a lot of visual micromanagement you need to do that should never be necessary in an RTS game. Lots of micromanagement. Do you really think about sending a worker to the next mineral node in Stark? No. You put them on mining and you expect him to keep mining until that base is emptied out. At that point, you send the entire batch to the different base you might have available. If you give him a command to build 2 or 3 buildings, you expect him to build 2 or 3 buildings. In this game, you give him a command to do one thing, and that's the one thing he will do until he no longer can. Whether it's build a building, whether it's gather a resource. It's just so clunky and frustrating on that level. Again, bring it back to the story, all of that fits because these are mindless drones, you can only give them a command at a time, and you have to diligently take care of them, but even then, this game just falls flat on its face in a variety of ways. And the most important and the most erroneous way this happens is the enemy AI and combat system. There just isn't any depth to it. My entire combat experience is smashing my tank-like creatures into the enemy, having a bunch of ranged creatures smack them, and keep my healers cycling through heals. And because everything is soft capped, your unit composition is pretty much set in stone. You will never have more than 2 or 3 healers. You will never have more than 2 or 3 tanks, because the game just doesn't allow the creation of any more of them. And that is damn frustrating. So the Hive tries to be a RTS RPG, but what it really succeeds at is being a RTS light and an RPG light with all the negatives of both and none of the positives of either, which is a damn shame, because from an artistic standpoint, this game is quite phenomenal. All sound assets are pretty good. The voice acting, especially for an indie title, is actually quite well put together. The story arc is quite interesting, and even the various boss battles have some definite thought and effort put into them that require you to actually think and look at the boss and his mechanics to fight him. I really like that. But everything else, from the way base building or lack of works, from the way you generate resources, from the way the finite number of resources on a map, just halfway through you can't do anything with them, from the soft cap on units, not being able to actually use half your resources, all of that is just plain frustrating, annoying, and makes the entire experience less than stellar, which is a damn shame. So yeah, the Hive is leaving early access on the 25th of August, after about 2 years in early access, and while I have to say that the game has gone tremendous strides during early access, I feel the core flaws in the game are just not up to par. And the developer has basically had this game done for the last half year and only waited on the ending sequence for the ending cutscene. But honestly, they could have better spent that time working on actually implementing proper game mechanics for RTS mechanics or proper game mechanics for their stories instead of working on a cutscene which doesn't really fit the story at all in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, the Hive, check it out on Steam if you are so inclined, though I would probably tell you to wait on a sale at the very least or skip this one entirely. So thank you for watching. If you liked this video, press the like button below. If you didn't like this video, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose, and leave a comment. Tell us what we can do better. Tell us what you enjoyed. We want to hear back from all of you. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. And until then, I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogic.